We start the session, I just want to remind everybody that this session today will be recorded. The session that is recorded today will be not only for us to post it on the website for you to review later and revisit the session if you need to, but it's also for those that are not present here today and wish to understand how to construct a robust research intent. If you do not wish to be present to show your face during the session while it's being recorded, I would like to kindly request if you can please turn off your camera and then we will continue. Bulbinakan talo for everybody. My name is Joseph Atalawa. I am the ASIA graduate officer that's based at the University of the South Pacific's research office at Lavella campus. And before we start today's session, I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we all meet across the world today, and also pay respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. Today we have an exciting session that is on developing a research proposal, and the workshop is being led and facilitated by Dr. Daniela Medina Hidalgo from the University of the Sunshine Coast. She's a research fellow in climate change adaptation and plays quite an important role in the past CR program as the climate resilience lead. Just before we start the session formally, I wish to just run through some housekeeping rules. Just requesting if all participants can please mute their microphones during the session, and if anyone has any questions, please feel free to use the chat box that's provided at the Zoom. If not, you can just write them down somewhere and bring up the questions as we enter into the Q&A session that's going to be open afterwards. I hope that is all. If that's okay with everybody, I'll pass on the platform now to Dr. Daniela for her to take over the session.
Thank you, Joe, for such a good introduction. I'm surprised you got all my names quite right. So for the purposes of this session, you can also call me Danny. That's what everyone calls me. And yeah, thank you for having me today here in this session. As Joe said, this is an important session that I think goes a little bit beyond just submitting your application for the ACR scholarship, but it's also, I think, a key skill that you will need to develop as a research student and a future researcher. So please, as Joe said, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat. And if perhaps Joe and Varsha can help me letting me know if there's a question I need to answer because I can't see the chat while I'm sharing the screen. All right, so we might just get started. Joe, just confirming you can see my screen there?
Yes, I can see your screen, Dr. Danny.
Excellent. All right. So the first thing is to really understand that these research intent forms are part of the application that you need to submit. So it's part of the supporting documentation of your application. And there's already templates that have been prepared by the scholarship team. So I'm assuming perhaps you'll get a copy of these slides. So if you get a copy of these slides, or if not, you can always go to the both FNU and USB websites where you find most of the information about the application round. So I have included links to both of the templates. They're essentially the same template. The only thing that changes is the headings, whether if you're applying for USB or FNU. But anyway, so make sure the first thing you do is to go on those links and download the appropriate template for your application. So the first part of the presentation is going to focus on running you through the main sections that are contained in those application or intent forms. As you will see, they're pretty kind of standard headings or sections that you will find in any research proposal. But because this is just a research intent, they're a little bit more condensed. And part of the tricky kind of aspect of this research intent is being able to be quite concise, because you'll see there's word limitations for each of the sections. So there's officially 6 sections written down in the in the form in the Word document. But I would also recommend do not forget like a seventh bonus section, which is adding the references. So this is not explicit in the research intent form, but as in any research output that you produce, you will be citing literature as part of section 4 or perhaps even section 5. So make sure that you do include a short reference list of all the citations you include inside the sections. All right, so section number 1 is the research background. And as you can see in brackets, I have highlighted the amount of word allocation you have for each section. This is only 300-word section.
Non-conservation people who are getting involved in this
Sorry, I
stuff, and
think
they're taking all the money.
someone has a microphone open. Thank you. So yeah, this research background section is basically where you state the research problem. And again, probably the first thing that you will do is just explain what problem is your research trying to solve. And then I always tell people, like, when you are explaining the significance of the problem, it is important that you not only focus on perhaps the agronomic elements of the problem. Let's say there's a specific pest that you're trying to target with your research. So don't only focus on describing the pest and how it affects the crops, but also try to link those implications from a social, environmental, or economic point of view. So again, if it's the example of a specific pest, so explain, for example, the economic loss that that pest causes in the region and so on, because that really helps you frame the problem from a, I would say, a broader perspective, but give it the significance that it needs. Perhaps with your research, you will only be focusing on a small element, but when you state the problem, you need to paint a good picture of why your research matters and what's the problem that you're trying to solve. And again, this is a section where you would like to be, oh, someone's drawing on the slides, where you would like to be quite specific about this problem. And again, if you have, for example, some statistics that you can use, for example, if you're talking of a specific crop, let's say eggplants in Fiji, if you can add in this problem statement some statistics about how many farmers are engaged in that industry and so on. Again, this is just ways to give a lot more context into that research background statement. In every slide that I've prepared, and again, I'm hoping that after this presentation, you'll get a copy of these slides. If you click on that link, I have included links to curated blogs that I have accumulated where you can, I'm giving you sort of like the main tips, the main issues that you should be focusing on. But sorry, someone's unmuted again. But yeah, if you're still struggling when you're writing that section, you can click on that link and you'll find a blog that gives very detailed explanations of how to write that specific section with a lot more examples and so on. So again, because this is a short session, I can't run you through all the aspects of writing a research background, but I'll be giving you some of the main elements, and then you can explore those blogs later on when you're writing each section. All right, so the second section after you state the background of your research is the research aim. And in this section, you want to be quite explicit about what is it that you're going to do with your research. So essentially, you would have one overarching aim, and then you can separate it into different objectives. Again, try to simplify it into one aim and then provide more details in the objectives, because if you have, let's say, 3 or 5 aims, that just makes your research look way too broad. And again, you need to be able to demonstrate with these research proposals or the research intents that the research that you're trying to achieve matches this sort of like scope and time frame of your research. So obviously, if you're doing a master's degree, this would be a bit more narrow than a PhD. But this is essentially the section where you tell the reader or you tell the person examining your proposal what is it that you're actually going to do with your research. And then it's obviously then important that this research aims section leads straight into your research questions. So this section needs to be really well aligned with the next section, which is stating your research questions. And again, I have left you a link there that you can check a more detailed blog about the things that you need to consider when you're writing your aims section and writing your objectives. And again, something to be mindful, this is only 200 words. So again, you have to be quite specific with how you write. Then we move to the section on research questions, and this is perhaps one of the sections that can be the trickiest. And as I said, this is something you will prepare for your scholarship application. But in reality, knowing how to write a good research question is, I think, a lifelong skill that you will have to develop as a researcher. And it is perhaps where I would say most research goes wrong. Your research questions you should think about them as your researcher torch. So everything you do as a researcher should be guided by those questions. And therefore, you really need to make sure you get these research questions right. So it might be that at the beginning of your research journey, as you're developing this research intent, you have some research questions that are kind of indicative, but as you move forward into your research journey, and particularly when you start developing your literature review, you will find that you will refine these research questions. And I would say a research question is a work in progress in your candidature, essentially until the point of confirmation, where I think at that point you should have a more clear idea of what your questions are. So it is okay if at the beginning they're not quite as refined as when you move towards the confirmation stage of your research. But as I said before, you need to start on good solid ground, and that means focusing on good research questions. So a few tips of what to do and what not to do. So the first thing I always say, a research question should not be answered by a yes or no question, because that's way too simplified. That's too easy to answer. We are researchers, so we look broadly at a topic. It should not be a question that you can answer by just saying yes or no. And I'm going to give you an example in a few slides. Again, make sure that your question is as focused and specific as you can. So for example, include details such as the location. Are you going to be studying climate change in atoll islands in the Pacific? Or are you going to be studying climate change in a specific community? If you have all those details narrowed down at this stage, make sure to include those as part of the research question. It's the same issue as defining your population. So this is a pretty good trick. Make sure that when you're writing the question, you have a location, a population, and an intervention. So I'm going to be studying how climate change affects taro production in smallholder farmers in Tonga, and the adaptations options that they're already implementing. So with that question, I'm already specifying the location, the population, and the intervention. It is also important, as I said before, that you match your research questions to the objectives of the research. And this is where essentially you could have a table. This is a helpful thing that I sometimes use, where in a table you have one column with the problem, one column with the objective, and then one column with the research questions. And this all should match. So for every problem statement, you have an objective of how you're going to address that problem. And then you have a corresponding question that matches the objective and the problem statement. And that helps you to make sure you're aligning your research proposal. And then something that's quite important, and I'm going to give you some examples so you get a better idea, is to use the right verbs for the right type of questions. So if you're going to use comparative kind of case studies, or you have a research question that aims to compare two things, then obviously the verb that you utilize needs to be a comparative type of verb. So again, this is probably the most important section of your research intent. So again, in that link, you can see a pretty good blog that has a lot of examples of the different types of research questions, and even examples of verbs you can use for each type. So this is what I was talking about. So if your research is more like a descriptive type, maybe your question starts with what are the characteristics of something. If it's a comparative research question, so like the example here, how does human growth hormone mimic the action of testosterone? So in the question, you should already be kind of like, just by the way you frame the question, you should be kind of knowing what type of research you're trying to do, if it's more exploratory, if it's an evaluation, for example, the efficacy of a treatment or whatnot. This should be already very clear from the way in which you frame your research question. All right, so because this was mentioned that this was a workshop, I think workshops need to be able to have a component where you do some work, and I stop talking. So this is the brief section of the workshop where I'm gonna ask you to do some work, and I'm gonna need maybe Joe's help to make sure people are writing in the chat, because I can't see the chat while I'm sharing the screen.
Sure.
So Joe, what we're gonna ask participants now. So in the purple box, I have two questions: research question 1 and research question 2. So research question 1 says, does having a dog at home require responsibility from a child? Research question 2 is, in what ways does having a dog at home require responsibility from a child? So can you put in the chat, which do you think is the best research question? Research question 1 or research question 2? Do we have, oh, I can see.
Yeah, we have a few.
Research
Yeah,
question
if the
2, okay.
answers-
Okay, pretty easy, no? Okay, can anyone, if you like, unmute yourself and explain to me why is research question 1 not the best option? Any takers? So someone wrote, gives a direct.
Yeah, it is yes and no question.
Exactly. That was Archie. I recognize that voice. So
Yes,
yeah, that
it's
was
a yes or no.
yeah, that was exactly my first point in the slides about what not to do. So if you use research question 1, you can know very easily this is something you can answer with yes or no. Exactly. Yeah, some people in the chat. Excellent. So how about in the light blue box? So research question 1 is, how does aspirin affect older adult populations who suffer from low heart pressure? And research question 2 is, how do medication affect people? So which one's the right one? Oh, you guys have been paying attention. All right, so research question 1. Can someone tell me why research question 1 is better? Based on the tips I gave you before?
Because it's only focused on one treatment.
Yeah, not specifically that it focused on one treatment, but this relates to the second point I had in my slides about being specific, remember? Exactly. So I'm defining
Okay.
which population I'm researching, which is
Right.
older adults, and I'm referring to the treatment, which is
And then-
aspirin effect on low heart pressure. This would be
Into the-
an even better question if I have a location for my research. So if I'm, for example, mentioning older adult populations in Australia. So that would
Okay.
have the specific 3 components that I mentioned about
Mm.
location, population, and intervention. So as you can see, yeah, there you go. Someone put specific to medication and demographic, target population, and location. Exactly. So as you can see, it's very easy to write bad research questions, but it's if you sit and analyze them, then it should be relatively easy as well to fix them. And again, I have in that link where you can see that source. If you go to that link, it'll give you a lot of different examples of good and bad questions. So what they did to fix the question. And I often find that's helpful. And again, this is perhaps something where you start with a question and then you discuss it with your advisor or with your potential supervisor or even with a colleague to see if they pick up things that are missing or ways in which you can make it even more specific. All right, so let's move to the next slide. So after you've done your research question, the next section is your literature review. And again, just bear in mind, this is only 300 words, so it's not nearly as exhaustive as your actual literature review will be in your actual thesis or in the papers that you write. This is really just to show to whoever is examining your research intent form that you know the literature of the topic you're exploring. So you need to have at least looked a little bit of what has been done in your area so that you can draft this section. And again, it's just demonstrating the knowledge of your field, or even I always say you should use this section to explain the big concepts that you're going to be dealing with. So again, in my case, if my research is about climate change adaptation, I should be using this section to define what climate change adaptation is, how it's measured, how it's usually researched, and how am I going to research it in my own piece of work. Again, as you move further along your research career, you will know that once you write your literature review, it should really help you refine your methodology and your research questions. Because as you go through whatever's been written in your field, you will get a better idea of the types of methodologies that people use and the type of research questions that perhaps have been already answered, and which gaps are still there in the literature that you will use and include as part of your research questions to then answer with your own research. Be very specific in this section about what are the gaps in the literature, because again, this is what justifies why your research matters. And then, as I said, present the main concepts that underpin your work. Big yellow highlighted thing is to not forget your references. Again, you're reviewing the literature. Basically every statement that you do in the literature review should be justified by a source. I often see literature reviews where people say research has shown blah, 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 and then no reference. So again, just because you're telling me that research has shown something doesn't give me the credibility. You need to give me what research has shown X, Y, and Z. So again, be quite specific and intentional with how you write this section. Methodology section is again probably one of the key ones and one of the ones that will perhaps change the most throughout your research journey. Again, there's no expectation that you will have this quite thoroughly defined by this point. But again, give yourself a good foundation, at least give yourself an idea of what methods you're going to use so that when you're at the stage of writing your confirmation document or even writing your thesis, you know quite well what you're doing and you can explain it and articulate it well. So on your left, you can see this diagram. So there's a lot of, you will see people use methods and methodology interchangeably, but they're not really interchangeable. Methodology is really the compilation of your research philosophy, your approach, your strategy, your data collection tools, and all of that. So methodology is probably what you should be calling that chapter in your thesis or in your confirmation document, and it is inclusive of all of these elements. So I like this Saunders explanation of the research onion. So again, think of it as layers. The outer layer is where you talk about your research philosophy statement. If you don't know what it is, just go and search what is a research philosophy, and it'll give you an explanation of the different types of research philosophies there are. Then you talk about your research approach, your approach to research. Are you using inductive or deductive analytical skills? Are you using quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods? Your research strategy, this is how you're actually going to go about your research. Are you going to do case studies? Are you going to run experiments? Are you going to do participatory action research? Again, these are all different types of research strategies. And then your techniques and procedures. You should talk about, is it a longitudinal study? Is it just a cross-sectional study? And then again, talk about the data collection methods that you're going to use. Are you going to use surveys? Are you going to use focus groups? Are you going to run PCRs in the lab? Again, just explain what sort of tools you'll be using. obviously discuss a little bit your sampling strategies. This is particularly important if you're going to work with people, how you're going to gather your participants and so on. And one element that I always mention is do not forget to talk about analysis. And this is key because talking about analysis forces you to think about analysis. And again, I think a lot of people encounter issues with their research because they design research without thinking how they're going to analyze data. And again, when you start thinking about analysis, is where you also start refining your questions. What sort of statistical analysis are you going to use? Or what sort of tools are you going to use to analyze your data? And it's a chance to already start giving you some foresight as to how you're going to present the research that you produce. So again, this is another one that's quite important. I'm only giving you the surface of what you should be thinking about, but you can click on the link for another great blog about how to write a good methodology section. And as I said, this is a brief research statement, so do not feel the pressure that it needs to be super detailed, but at least it needs to be able to, on those 300 words, give you a good sense of what is it that you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Research outcomes. So probably if you've managed to align your proposal to the point where you've worked on that table of identifying the problem, the objective, the research question, and then the methodology that you're going to use, at this point, really articulating your research outcomes should be quite straightforward. But this is, again, a section where, as in the research background, you need to be a little bit strategic about how you present it. It's not that your research outcome should be a paper. That's an output. Everyone produces papers as part of their research. So the outcome is like, how is it that your research is going to change the world? Or how is it that it's going to make a contribution? Again, this is where you link it back to that problem and say, look, as a product of my research, I should be able to provide farmers with alternatives on how to use biological control to manage this specific pest and disease. And this matters because blah, 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 blah. So again, this is the selling point of your proposal. Also be a little bit careful not to oversell your proposal. I often see proposals where you read the outcomes and essentially someone that's going to save the world with their research, but then you look at the methods and they did like a simple survey. So again, your outcomes need to be proportional to what you're actually doing. And again, it's not that you need to save the world with your research, but you do need to be quite explicit about how your research fits within the broader landscape of the research that's already being produced. Again, this is where you would like to be quite specific about your contribution to knowledge and or practice. I know not all research has practical implications, even though I feel like in our fields and in this type of ACR scholarship projects, most of your research really will have a contribution to practice. So again, do not only link to the academic. So you're going to develop a new method for DNA sampling, whatever. Yeah, that's a scientific contribution, but how is this changing or potentially changing the lives of people that use this technology or will benefit from this technology? And again, as I said, think broadly about your work. How does your work fit within food systems in the Pacific or within solving specific problems or issues that you're trying to target? And again, this is only 300 words. So as I've repeated constantly during this presentation, the key to this research intent is that you're specific and quite clear about the way you communicate. So in some ways, this is a little bit more challenging than writing a full proposal because you have a lot of room to actually explain things. In this research intent, it is going to be probably the trickiest is to be able to explain properly what you're going to do in the scope of the words that's been given to you by the template. So again, I wanted to discuss in the last section of the presentation some of the key points that go beyond this research intent really, but that matter when it comes to formulating a research proposal. So the first thing, and I cannot emphasize this enough, is that this is one of the tools that will help you start developing those teamwork skills, because you will not be working on your research in isolation. Your first points of contact will always be your supervisors, and developing this research intent is a great way to kickstart that relationship. So to really know how they like to work and to really start building that relationship with your supervisors. So it shouldn't be a situation where you sit down in front of your computer and panicking 30 minutes before a submission deadline, you put the research proposal together. No, this should be really a back and forth iterative process where you develop some work and you consult with your potential supervisors and you use this, as I said, to start creating that relationship with them. Again, as I said, not a last minute thing. Take your time. If you're already planning to apply for these scholarships, you should, I think, already be contacting your potential supervisors and working through these proposals. As I said, this is not going to be probably the final document that you use in your confirmation, but it will help you build a good foundation. It is also the opportunity for you to start giving your own flavor, as I'd like to say, to your research. Some of the ACR projects perhaps would have already quite well-defined objectives and quite well-defined outcomes that the ACR project would like to achieve. But do not forget, this is your candidature, your PhD, or your master's, and it is vital that throughout the process you develop these research development skills. If your supervisor is handing you an already defined and made research proposal, I think they're giving you a disservice because they didn't give you the chance to learn these skills. So again, if you're working on a project that's already pretty well defined, that's fine, but give it a thought. Give it a thought about how you can give it a spin, use your specific skills to write those skills in the proposal, and make sure you adjust it to something that speaks to what interests you and what your strengths are as a researcher. And then, yeah, as I said, this is beyond just ticking the box that you have to submit. This is really, for me, about developing those lifelong research skills. So if you continue down the path of research, or even if you exit academia and go into working in the ministries and so on, developing a research proposal is not such a different task than developing a project or managing a project. So again, if you learn these skills well, specifically about how to articulate different sections and make sure they all align and tidy up, this is a skill that you're going to use, I would say, even beyond your research career. And then I'm going to finish off this bit of the presentation so we have quite a bit of time for questions, is talking a little bit about the common problems that I think you really need to be careful and need to try to avoid. So as I said, one of the trickiest bits about this research intent form is that it is quite short. So you have to be quite consistent and quite clear about your different statements. As I said, something that helps me is using argument tables. So for each of the sections, develop a table so that it allows you to see and match what is that you're trying to say. Another key sort of like trick that I say to people is make sure that your paragraphs have a structure. So before you start each paragraph, you should have what you call a thesis statement or your main argument. So think about what the argument is going to be for that paragraph. Then you will have supporting lines or supporting statements where you explain that thesis statement or elaborate on it, and then a conclusion. So it's basically the same structure that you would have for a whole section of a paper, which is introduction, body, and conclusion. You should basically also follow that same structure for each paragraph. It's like a little essay in each paragraph. So if you write it in that way, very intentional, then you'll see at the end the result is that when you read that paragraph, it all makes sense. So again, it might take a little bit more time in planning those arguments, but it pays off in terms of making sure that your proposal really reads well and addresses all the main key issues. Again, some of the biggest problems that I see when I read research proposals is the misalignment between the aims, the questions, the methods, and the outcomes. And this is a big one. I think it's when you start, it's sometimes hard to point out where this alignment's not there. But I always tell people like, as you progress in your research career, you're going to become better at finding these issues and making sure that you're aligning all of the sections of your proposal. Again, something that I really am picky about is, for example, and it's something that's quite specific to my field, but I see a lot of proposals that perhaps in the aims or even in the title of the research, they mention things like climate change, but then as you read through the proposal, there's nothing to do with climate change, that there's no inclusion of anything related to climate change in the methodology or in the way that the research is going to be addressed. So those words are kind of thrown in the title and thrown in the introduction, but then forgotten. So these are key things that you need to make sure make sure you're dealing with. Again, if you're mentioning things like food security, things like gender inclusion, which are sort of like cross-cutting issues, if you're mentioning them as part of your aims or as part of your title, make sure they're actually part of the proposal. And this is something that's quite important. And again, probably one of the main issues that I think we face with these scholarship rounds is rushing that proposal development. I think if a week before the submission, or even sometimes a day before your submission, you're asking your potential supervisor to sign on that research intent to make sure they're okay, then you didn't do it right. If the first time you talk about this research proposal is asking for a signature at the end for the submission, then you didn't do it right, because this really should be the conversation starter for your negotiations with your supervisors. So again, don't rush it. Pretty much, you needed to have started this process yesterday or 3 weeks ago. But if you haven't started this conversation, it is a reminder that you really need to go and start that conversation with your supervisors and start developing this proposal. So that's it for me. And then I would like to open it up for some really good in-depth Q&A. Again, if you want to ask for specific examples of the topics that I mentioned, feel free, or if you have any issues that you'd like to clarify. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see everyone a little bit easier. No questions? So if I don't get any questions, I'm just going to assume it was either perfect presentation, all clear, or too confusing. So
Sorry, we have
I have
Mr.
a question.
Penayamua who has a question.
yep, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation, madam. My question is, I have a topic with two supervisors and one external one. So I have visited one of them. Do I need to get both of them involved, or one is okay?
So I would say for sure your principal supervisor needs to be involved, and Joe and Varsha can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure they need to also sign your proposal at the end. But as I said, teamwork is key. So if you're working with a group, it is a good practice to include the other supervisors in your group. So a common issue that HDR students face in their candidatures is that sometimes they have to almost function as a mediator between the principal supervisor and the consultant supervisor, or the principal and the secondary, because they sometimes don't get along or they have conflicting views. So again, as you learn how to manage your research, and managing sometimes people is part of being a researcher, you will find that it's better if from the beginning everyone in the team is on the same table about
Okay.
things. So yeah, I would advise that you include all of your supervisory panel as part of the conversation. But again, probably it's your primary supervisor that will have to do the final paperwork, signing it off. Perhaps you would like to have a couple of one-on-ones with your primary as you work through the first draft. And then once you have a first draft, you can invite the whole team to review and so on. So again, this will depend a little bit on your team and their availability, but I do recommend they are aware of your research intent as part of the process of developing it. I think someone put in the chat, any other way to, I think, contact my supervisors, because I have not been, I have probably emailed them, but no replies. Maybe I ask Vasha or Joe to address this one.
Yes, I think Joe has written. Is it for USP or FNU? FNU. Can you send a reply to them and copy me? And then I will assist you in getting in contact with those supervisors.
Any other questions? We can always do a little bit of practice if anyone wants to share a little bit about the research that they're planning to do. Some ideas about the research question, and then we can all help provide feedback and guide you a little bit if anyone's keen to do that or share that. Someone's clapping. That's good.
Hello.
Hello? Yes?
Yeah, go ahead, Panat.
Yeah. Madam, like I have two primary supervisors with FNU, and the other one is based in Australia. So my question is, I have started talking with one of them. Do I need to get involved with the second one, or one is okay? Or do they need to sign both the forms before submitting for the one that is away overseas in Australia?
So,
Actually, I am. It's in FNU, eh?
yeah, thanks.
There are two lecturers are involved in FNU with this project. So I've started communicating with one of them on getting my research intent.
Yeah. So as I said in
But-
a similar answer, in terms of like the admin part of things, you only need the signature from your primary supervisor. But as a good practice, I would advise that you at least copy your other supervisors in the process of developing your research intent. I believe also you need to provide a letter of support from the Australian-based or the ACR-based supervisor. So again, just as a general good practice of good communication, if you're going to be working as a team, just make sure that everyone's aware of your topic, your proposal, and where you're at in the process of developing and submitting.
Sorry, could I just make a comment, Danny, as well? You do need a signature and agreement from the co-supervisor as well as the principal supervisor. If that is an ACR co-supervisor or another co-supervisor from an organization in Australia or New Zealand, it does need to be endorsed and therefore worked on, not just endorsed at the last minute, as Danny mentioned, but also the proposal should be developed in consultation with not only your principal supervisor, but the co-supervisor too.
Yes, I do agree with that.
Okay.
But my question was with the project that is involving FNU, I have two supervisors there.
Who are
I've
both
met
acting
one.
as principal, Penai?
Yes. So, but I have met one of them, and I'm starting to work with my research intent. Do I have to get the view of the second one? Or when it comes to the signing in the form, one is okay?
Varsha?
Uh,
This is an
both,
FNU specific.
yes, both will be required because you'll be working with all of them. May I know who the supervisor is?
One Indian guy and Dr. Leningila, Dr. Elisoni. Both are based at FNU Cornevia. One is Dr. Elisoni Leningila,
Right.
and another is
Dr.
a
Hriday
lecturer
Sachan.
from
I think it's
Doctor?
Dr. Sachan.
Yeah, Dr. Sachan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
do I need?
Yes, you will
Come,
need to
Varsha.
communicate with both of them.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. So when it comes to the signing, I'll need both of the signatures before I get the signature from the external examiner in Australia.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. That's clear with me now. Thank you very much, Varsha.
Sorry, Dr. Tani, there's a question for you in the chat. Slade is asking, is it possible to contact you directly if they need assistance with the development or research intent?
I would say first contact your supervisors. As I said, they will be the people you should start developing a relationship with, and they are all probably even more experienced academics than I am, so they should be able to help you with the components of the research intent. However, I kind of enjoy doing these things and helping people around. So if you do have any questions of any of the points that I mentioned in this presentation, or even after looking at the different resources that I provided, the blog sections, yeah, feel free to drop me an email and I'll try to help in any way as possible. But as I said, your main technical support, even from this point forward, should be your supervisors. Someone also wrote, does the supervisor need to be from an academic field or can it be from a technical field? Maybe this is a question for Joe and Varsha. As far as I know, every university has its own policies with regards to who can supervise you. But a piece of advice that I'll give you, again, as my experience in research is you don't need to have everyone that you collaborate with as part of your supervision team. Your supervision team is like the official support team that you get. It's usually directly linked to the university, so they will handle signatures and approvals and things like that. But as you develop your own research, nothing's stopping you from reaching out and collaborating with people from technical, even industry. And even it's something I would strongly advise. So if you start collaborating with someone who's from the industry or from the ministry, that's great. And they don't necessarily need to be formally part of your supervisory team, but it can be part of your support collaboration network. And it's something that you should develop as you continue to progress in your research.
Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, can I just add on to that if that's okay? I know for the university policies, it's mandatory that the principal supervisor should be from either FNU or USP. But yes, I concur what Dr. Dennis said. They can be from technical field as well, but you can decide whether you want to include them as a supervisory team or collaborative team.
Thank you, Joe. Similarly, that's what FNU is doing. They can be either in the supervisory team, or it can be an advisor just to assist you.
And sometimes, again, just from experience, you end up getting a lot more support and help and feedback from sometimes people that are not part of your supervision team. And that's something that you learn and that you should start developing, because obviously once you finish your master's or you finish your PhD, you're going to go into a job, and it is always handy to have those networks of people that work in the industry, or even people that can then help you translate your research into practice and implement and apply some of the components of your research. So do not feel like the only people you can talk to and include in your papers is your supervisors. You basically, as I said, become your own researcher, build your own networks. But as always, good practice, keep your supervisors in the loop. You want to avoid things like working with someone who's a direct competitor and doesn't get along with your primary supervisor. That's probably going to give you a little bit of headache. So as a good practice, just keep open, clear communication with the team. But yeah, reach out to others that you think can bring specific skills or expertise into your work. Someone said, can I share my research question? Oh, no, wait. Before, some topics on the compendium highlights TBC for either a principal or co-supervisor. Would that supervisor be assigned at a later stage or need spaces? So I think this one's for Varsha and Joe.
Joe is mute. But for that, we are still liaising with the ACI team and assigning the appropriate supervisors, either principal or co-supervisors. And the list will be updated as we go along.
Yeah, the same is for USB. We're hoping that we will be able to fill in those TBCs very soon, but we're working as hard as we can to ensure that we get the list ready for you so you can contact them and contact the supervisors directly and submit your application as soon as you can. We thank you for your patience, everyone.
Thank you, team. So, Salote, can I share my research question? I need assistance. Great. Yeah, that's excellent. Share with us. And then as a team, now you have, I don't know how many, 41 people in this room who should be able to give you some advice. So if you want to unmute yourself and give your example.
Okay, hello everyone.
Hi, Salote. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, Salote.
My topic is developing wild turmeric cultivars to boost their production economic returns in Fiji. So I have done my first draft. I've completed a first draft and I have liaised with my principal supervisor as well. Just confused with my research question after the presentation. My question is, what are the current cultivars of wild turmeric cultivated in Fiji, and how do they perform regarding yield and quality? That's my first research question.
Yeah, so can you repeat that again?
What are the current cultivars of wild turmeric cultivated in Fiji, and how do they perform regarding yield and quality?
Yeah,
Since wild turmeric hasn't been cultivated in Fiji for economic purpose, Fiji is just cultivating the local ones.
Yeah, look, to me that sounds really spot on. Perhaps again, as I said, if you already have so you mentioned Fiji, are you gonna try to scope all the wild cultivars that exist all around Fiji, or are you gonna focus on, let's say, Viti Levu or Vanua Levu? Or...
I'd say in PG, all around
PG as a whole. All right. Yeah. And then the other thing that, because there's a second part of your question is linking it to production. So again, think about what are you going to be measuring? Is it like I don't know, kilos per hectare or whatever? Is it productivity? Is it quality? Is it based on, I don't know, size or development of the tuber, whatever. So if you can at this stage give an indication of what you mean about production, is it just yields? Then make sure you mention that in the question as well. Is it potential for export? And so on. Something that reminds me that I didn't mention is remember when I say you'll have like your aim or your problem statement, your aim, and then you'll have objectives. So sometimes a good practice is you will have an overarching research question that matches your aim. So it seems by the way you're framing it, this research question that you presented is based on your aim, your main aim of your research. But then you'll probably have objectives, like for example, again, if you are then interested to explore what are the potentials for using some of these wild varieties as commercial, and then let's say I'm just giving an example. One of those objectives is like a cost analysis or production economic analysis or market analysis for these varieties. That could be an objective, and then that could be linked to an additional research question. So again, don't feel like you only have to have one research question for your whole research. You can subdivide it into sub-questions. Something that you need to be mindful again is to make sure that you don't have two questions into one. So again, it's pretty common for people to say, I don't know, in your case, that in the same research question, you'll mention productivity and sustainability. So again, it's two different kind of interventions that you'll be looking into. So perhaps in that case, instead of like having the two in one research question, you can separate it into sub-question. Again, just to facilitate how you explain it. And again, think of how this then links to the next bit, which is the methods or the methodology. So if for the production side, what you're going to do is, let's say you're going to identify some of these wild varieties and you're going to run field experiments where you plant them under a specific treatment, then that probably matches an experimental component. But again, let's say you then want to identify if there's like a potential for export or if there's market for it, and you're going to do like a market assessment. That's another methodology, and that probably needs to be linked to a different question, if that makes sense. So again, it all goes back to working that table of problem, aim, objective, research question, and then methodology, and make sure they all link across, and then obviously outcomes at the end of it. So does that make sense, Salote? Or did I
Yes,
confuse
ma'am.
you
Thank
more?
you very much.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Did we have any other questions?
It's just one with regards to the compendium.
Yeah. So point 4, consult. Oh, you go ahead, Joe. You can read it.
Sorry. With reference to the compendium again, part 4, consult the register of supervisors. What does this mean? Especially should one choose to make a new topic? Is there an ACR nominated register, or are we able to reach out to applicable supervisors outside the ones that are already in the compendium?
Again, I think this is more a question for you guys.
You want me to answer, Joe?
Sorry, yeah, I was just about to ask you as well.
Okay, I think
go ahead,
in
Dr.
this
Linda.
instance, thank you, Joe. If you are identifying a topic that is not on the list, which is part of the scholarship for 2025, that's an option. And then you can reach out to a supervisor, an external supervisor of your choosing, and then as long as they're happy to work with your principal supervisor, either USP or FNU, then that should be fine if they agree to be your host supervisor as a co-supervisor. So there isn't a register as such to look at, apart from the table or the compendium that is there on the ACR website and the FNU and USP websites. But also looking to make this a little bit broader beyond the ACR project leaders. So if you've identified someone that's happy to work with you and you have already started talking to them, then that's absolutely fine. And I'm hoping that everyone who's in this group here has already checked their eligibility with either Joe or with Varsha for the relevant program that they're interested in by this stage. I'm hoping that's the case, and that if you're working on a research intent, you already know that you're eligible to apply for whichever program you're interested in. It's great to see so many people here today, especially on a public holiday in Fiji. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Linda. I hope that answers your question, Karan. If it's not clear, feel free to ask us again. We'll try and explain it. Oh, okay, thank you. While we still have Dr. Danny, and I know we've gone over 1 hour, but if does anyone else have any questions, pending questions or burning question they wish to ask our expert, Dr. Danny, please, now is the time to ask these questions.
If there's no questions, I'd like to leave you with a final piece of advice, and is to not feel overwhelmed. Perhaps at the beginning you'll find it's a big task and you're a bit lost, but you'll find as you start putting words into paper, you'll find that you'll start making sense of your own ideas. In fact, I think part of writing your research proposal or your research intent is to help you clarify your own ideas. And as I said, take your time. I left you with those resources for each of the sections. So as you start writing each section, just click on the blog. I purposefully, these are resources that I've used for other workshops or that I've started to accumulate. And I've chosen specifically the ones that are more to the point, brief, and give you the information that should get you started with heaps of examples. So if you start working through each section, just go and look at the blog posts and use it as a guidance. They have examples, tools, tables, and so on that you can use. And yeah, just get started is the main thing. The hardest step is the first one. But once you start working on it and once you start having those conversations with your supervisors, you should feel at least quite confident, hopefully by the end of it, that you at least know what you're doing and that you, as I said, you've started to build this relationship. Someone left a quick question there saying, should the word limit would be 300 words exact? I would say, yeah, keep it clear, concise. I mean, no one's gonna not accept your proposal if you go over by 50 or so, like usual logic of when you submit assignments and so on. And then again, usual logic to not count your references as part of your word count. And I think that's it. And yeah, Varsha and Joe, just feel free to share the PDF of the slides with everyone who attended this session, or even if you want to just share it as part of the recording of this session as well, feel free. And yes, I mentioned if anyone has any questions that they were too shy to ask today, you can always contact me later if I can be of any help.
Thank you, Dr. Danny. If no one else has any question, I would like to take this time to thank you all so much again for availing yourselves on this day. If you're in Fiji, thank you so much for availing yourself on this holiday that I know it's supposed to be yours to be present here today so you can learn how to develop a robust research intent from our very own Dr. Danny, who's an expert. I will give you back your afternoon to you all. Just circling back around, if you want the research intent, the links are on the chat group, and this session will be posted up on our various websites. If you want to review and revisit what all has been taught today, or just listen to Dr. Danny go on and on about real life examples, please click on the link again and rewatch it. I'm sure you'll be refreshed, and you'll also get some tips and insights that you might have missed or forgotten after this session. Thank you so much again, Dr. Denny.
I was gonna say, I think people have better things to do than listen to me over and over again. But yeah, it's always a pleasure to see everyone, and good to see some familiar faces here in this call as well. So, and yeah, good luck to everyone in their applications.
Thank you so much, Dr. Denny, for your time and for those
Bye.
great words of wisdom. And from drawing from your years of experience on developing research intent. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Have a blessed day and blessed week. And reach out to your supervisors, everybody, and see you all again. Hopefully, we will get to see your research proposals submitted in the application come 23rd of October at 5 p.m. With those few words, thank you so much for your time and have a great afternoon. Misamwale.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
So Tatale, Joe, and Vasha.
Bye.
Bye.